The Canadian Civil Liberties Association says the federal government's bail reform bill, C-48, will not make the public safer. So let's talk about this. We're joined now by Shakir Rahim, the director of the Criminal Justice Program for the CCLA. Thanks for joining us this afternoon to talk about this. David Lametti certainly seems to think it will. Why does the CCL think it won't?
I think the main reason why we don't think it's going to make the public safer is it doesn't address some of the major underlying causes of crime and public safety risks that exist today in the country. Issues like mental health, housing, social services. While this is going to make bail more difficult to access, the CCLA is not of the view it's actually going to address the underlying drivers of public safety risks.
I hear what you're saying about the underlying drivers, but in terms of what Bill 48, or pardon me, C-48 is specifically looking at, they're talking about people who've, used weapons in a crime or, within 5 years allegedly reoffended here. That sounds to a lot of people, I think, watching that might make us safer if people who have a sort of history of violent crimes are forced to sort of stay behind bars and await bail before they go to trial. Is that not a move in the right direction?
So I think one of the ways to understand why that won't actually work is to know the reality of the bail system on the ground today. Mm-hmm. The number of people denied bail in Canada in the past 4 decades has increased by 400%. Right now in provincial and territorial jails across the country, the number of people who are in prison who have not been convicted of the crime they are charged with is at 70%. You can be ordered detained as it stands under the law, under the public safety ground at the moment. So the law of bail already allows for those kinds of detentions, and if anything, we've seen a trend where bail has become more and more difficult to attain in this country. And that's why when we actually want to ask what's going to get at the root causes and issues that you talk about, making something that is already terribly difficult to access more difficult to access, that is a constitutional right for all Canadians, is not the answer.
So when we hear the headlines or the cries from, politicians, premiers, ex-police chiefs, current police chiefs about the sort of catch and release, this open door, in and out, rearrest, are you saying those are minority cases rather than the actual reality, really?
That's accurate to say, and I think one of the most powerful voices that we heard over the past few months was the mother of the boy who was tragically killed at Keele Station. Mm-hmm. And what she told the public through her grief very clearly was that she wanted to see a real answer to this challenge that's facing all of us, that we all care about our safety and the safety of our children. And as someone who is a nurse, who's seen these things firsthand, she was the first person to say, what we need is investment in meaningful solutions that will lead to a difference. It's easy to change a line on a statute book and call it a day. What's harder for politicians to do is actually sit down, look at these root causes and systemic issues that have plagued us for the past few decades, and make the difficult calls and investments necessary for Canadians to feel safer.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the government can't get there then?
I think one of the challenges is that it really requires governments to look at their own policies and legislation over the past few decades and think really critically about where they've gone wrong and where they've failed. And I think that people don't want to sit down and make those difficult types of self-assessments and questions. It's always easy to say, okay, there's an accused person, who's accused of a criminal offense, let's just make their life harder. What we forget about is that 50% of people who are charged with a crime ultimately aren't convicted of that crime. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine a world where we make bail even more difficult and difficult to access, and people are waiting in prison for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, only to be completely innocent? I don't think that's a world we want to live in as Canadians.
And are there not other costs associated with that of sort of keeping people in that perhaps if people were sort of not necessarily resigned to bail, I suppose, under Bill C-48 and what they're proposing here, that the jail system may actually, the prison system in general, would move and progress a little bit better? Because we hear about these backlogs and cases being thrown out for time and things along those lines.
Absolutely. And, you have to remember that at the end of the day, a provincial territorial jail is not a happy place. There aren't a lot of programs. There's not a lot of support. You're taken out from your community. If we really want people to do well, get better, be pro-social, live a productive existence in our society, extracting them from their home and putting them into a place where they're not receiving care and support is just not the way to do it.
Okay, well, we'll see if the government makes any changes. Indeed, Shakir Rahim is the director of the Criminal Justice Program for the CCLA. Appreciate the time this afternoon. Thanks for the conversation.
My pleasure.
Good to talk to you. Okay.